Hello and welcome to Raised by Horror, an all-inclusive podcast for grown-up latchkey kids of all genders and orientations whose proxy parenting was done by horror films and books. We have a tantalizing show full of dreadful delights, hosted by our very own Richard Kadrey and Violet Blue, and of course me, your production demon, Scotland Symons. Check out raisedbyhorror.com for more info, and now, on with the show.
Oh, for fuck's... Stop. Some fucking spam phone call. Perfect.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Good timing.
That's absolutely 1000% perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a brand new podcast called Raised by Horror, where we are going to birth to you out of some strange, ethereal, demonic womb some kind of podcast. We're going to talk to you about things, but we figured before we even get started, we should probably tell you a little bit about who we are, what we're trying to do here, and yeah, just have a little conversation with everybody out there in the world. And yeah, I don't know. Violet, Richard, I guess we should start with talking about who we are, maybe, perhaps?
I guess.
Makes sense.
Getting started is the hardest part.
It's the worst. It's the 100% the worst.
I know. Well, my name is Violet Blue, and I'm an author and a journalist, and I love horror. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Like, it is a part of me, a part of who I am. And it's just, I think about it all the time. I watch horror films all the time. I read horror books all the time. And I could just go on and on and on about all the reasons that I do all of those things. But it's important to me. Mm-hmm. It's really important to me. And I think that's one of the things that has bonded Richard and I, for sure, like over the years. Like, Richard and I have known each other for decades.
Yeah.
And he's obviously, well-established horror writer, but we bonded personally as friends. We lived in San Francisco together at the same time. And one of the things that we used to do before the pandemic was we would get together, get some whiskey, and watch horror films together. Mm-hmm. And it was a blast. And we'd constantly be recommending horror films to each other and having conversations about it. And Scotland and I have also been friends for over a decade, at least, I believe.
At least.
Like, I actually can't remember where I met either of you at this point. It's been so long, and
Me neither.
We're just like ancient crypt keepers from the goth scenes. But like, exactly. But like, one of the things about my friendship with Scotland is that Scotland isn't a horror person.
I'm a baby bat.
I know. But one of the amazing and fun things about my friendship with Scotland has been constantly looking for films to watch with her that are horror but not horror. So it's like the horror films that people who don't like horror will watch. And that's been a super fun side project for years and years and years and years. So that's a little bit about me.
Richard, how about you?
I'm Richard Kadrey, and I write horror. I've written horror books, stories, film stuff. And yeah, like Violet and Scott, not less so Scotland, but like Violet, I love horror. I was raised with horror. Monsters are my first friends. I grew up in a latchkey kid situation. So The Creature from the Black Lagoon and Frankenstein and all of them were my earliest friends. And I hope that in this podcast, we can bring that to other people. We want to bring weird stuff to weird people, and in as nice a way as possible.
It's rad.
And that's a lot of the name of the podcast was so easy for us,
mm-hmm. because
it was like, yeah, we were raised by horror. We weren't really raised by parents.
Yes.
We were raised by Romero, like that makes more sense to me. So like, as a kid, like I related harder to horror films than I did to any parental units or anything like that weren't around anyway. So, and I feel like there's a lot of people like us who feel like horror raised them, or at least spiritually raised them, or even emotionally raised them. you
Mhm.
know, like with all the ways that horror speaks to the different parts of our survival instincts and our psyches and our coping mechanisms, and the way that we test ourselves and the way that we improve ourselves and the way we see the world.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people were raised by horror, and that's so yeah, so that was like that was an easy naming process for
Yes.
sure.
I mean, you
Yes.
totally handled the question I had for you both of like, where did you get the name for the podcast? And it's just
Uh,
Oh,
that's just phenomenal. Like, I love it.
oh, that's
I love it.
awesome.
Um, I guess for myself, I'm Scotland Symons. I'm an artist. I've worked in other places, but those aren't important. And I wasn't necessarily raised by horror, but it was always around me. My mother was super obsessed with horror, still is obsessed with horror. Um, and so I remember as a child just being like, oh gosh, what's on? Oh no, I'm not watching this. And I would just like leave the room because it would just always terrify the living heck out of me. But I loved the gentler side of it. I loved the kooky, spooky, kind of like gently goth, creepy bits of it that were always just kind of fun and happy. And those became my friends. Like the Addams Family was a thing that I just watched religiously.
mhm.
It was my friend. I loved the monsters. Like I loved it when it wasn't trying to decimate my emotional kind of state of being with fear, but it was just
Mhm.
other. It was just like I always felt like I belonged in the other group of like, oh,
Yeah.
they're just a weird one out. Like that was my happy place. And so I always gravitated towards those things that had a bit of humor in it. They always had a bit of like gentleness to it, or just like a collective unit. And there were
Mhm.
several kind of fun little things that I attached myself to on that one. And that's just kind of who I am. And so it's been a real pleasure to be subjected to some interesting films.
We need
For
to
the
make a
show.
we need to make a super cut for you of like all the old Hammer horror movies without the
Okay.
scary part, without the scariest parts, but
I'm
just the
s-
weird parts.
I'm super
Yes,
into it. I'm super
yes,
into it.
yes.
I It would just be nothing but inspiration for me because like
Yeah.
it's a joy. Like I am that's why I call myself like a baby bat. Like I enjoy vampire gore, but I don't want to be scared to pieces if that makes sense.
hmm
It's very
Yeah.
strange. It's like
No,
on one
it's
hand I should
perfect.
be terrified, but no.
But then
It's
we will
perfect.
introduce you to Jean Rollins' French vampires, which you
Oh
will
yes.
love.
Okay.
Artsy dams.
Okay.
But it's perfect actually because and that's one of the reasons I love that you're on this show with us because a lot of not a lot, well, a good amount of the impetus for us wanting to do this podcast and this show is that so many people approach horror from so many different places.
hmm
And there's just a giant misconception that people are attracted to horror for certain reasons because, you know, I mean, and of course the negative connotations are people like horror because they're broken, or people
Right.
like horror because they want to be traumatized,
Right.
or, you know, it's the person that, you know, with the hot sauce can't get enough hot sauce and then they until they set their face on fire, and like, you know, just all of these like misconceptions about why people like horror and are interested. And the reality is that people come from so many different places and so many different perspectives,
hmm
and horror is this wide genre. It's so multifaceted. It's got so much going on with it. It's not a one trick pony of any kind. It's not just jump scares. It's not just slasher gore. You know, it's all these different aspects of art
hmm
and feeling and community and experiences. And having someone on the show with us who would be qualified probably as, you know, like someone who isn't into horror is perfect, because I don't think you have to be into the ooky, you know, gross, icky, scary trauma stuff necessarily to be someone who appreciates horror.
Well, I
So
But
I'm
we
glad
will
you're here.
lure you. We will lure you further into the horror world.
I'm into
Yes, we
it.
will.
We
We
will
will bring
seduce
you to
you
the
into
dark
the dark
side.
side.
I
Yes.
Exactly.
I am here to be
Exactly.
seduced. I have paid my dues. I'm ready. I have subscribed to the full seduction feed, so I'm ready. My body is ready. My mind is ready. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm hoping we could just take everybody with us on that journey too,
Mhm.
to
Yes.
drive them into it.
Well, that's
It'll be
also part of,
nice.
oh, go ahead.
It'd be nice because we want to talk about horror, but a lot of what we want to talk about are not the most obvious horror movies. We're going to
Mhm.
have themes, but within those themes, we're not We're going to try and stay away from the really big names unless we need to give context. And so we'd like to, yeah, we want to be fun, but we also want to be a little educational too, without being pedantic.
I'm into the education part of it because like so much of the backstory makes it more interesting for me too. Like knowing like, you know, why is this film interesting to you? And then the perspectives of like what you get out of it kind of shares with me and hopefully everybody else the perspective on like how they could approach it or how they could find something really interesting with it, which is rad. That makes me really happy. Like I love that. Kind of, it's that whole goth community thing, kind of
Yes,
picking off a little bit.
It speaks to a lot of also like when Richard and I were talking about doing this podcast, like a lot of it. So it came out of like where Richard and I would have just these long conversations on the phone, but then we started watching horror together on the phone, you know, living in different parts of the world, living on different time zones and stuff like that. Like basically horror buddies that would get on the phone and click play at the same time and watch something new or watch something different or you know, watch a couple of things in a row. And the discussions that we would have about it were discussions we weren't really hearing anywhere else.
Yeah.
We were having these talks about, you know, the perspective of the art or the odd little trivial bits of things or things that it reminded us of, and talking about things about the way that the aspects of horror that we like and what works about horror and what doesn't work about horror, and why those are tied into a lot of our shared values in terms of like sex positivity and all gender, all orientation perspectives. And that this was something that was really being missed from all of the discussions about horror books and horror films. Just not just the inclusiveness and approaching it from an inclusive perspective, the way that we do, but also talking about why that's important and why that makes stories better.
Yes.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot because I think that was always a big turnoff for me, was kind of the mainstreaming effect of a lot of the, oh, it's the horror, you know, trilogy show or whatever, something like that. I know I've seen them on TV and I'm not going to say the names of what they are because they don't need the extra publicity, but like, you know, it's like the marathon of whatever. And it's like, it's kind of interesting, but they don't seem to really go that deep. And honestly, it kind of feels more like a mystery science theater at that point to me. It's just kind of like, okay, but it's not funny because there's no additional context that people are applying to it. And it usually has like too sexist of a vibe or a theme that makes it even want me to like enjoy it. I'm just like, oh great, another movie where women just get tortured and that's not really interesting to me. Like that's boring.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's like, you know, here's another horror story about a little boy and a little boy's journey. I'm like, give me some little girl's journey or some little they's journey or something that I can relate to a little bit more, because I'm sick of that. And, you know, and also Richard and I were having these discussions, very passionate discussions about like, okay, like when we get to that part in this horror film that we're, you know, just starting to watch, and we find out that the reason that the bad evil person is bad and evil is because they're a cross-dresser or they're trans, we're just that's stupid. Like that doesn't even make sense anymore.
It's lazy.
Exactly.
It's garbage.
It's bad fucking storytelling. You know, it's shorthand, and it just tells me the rest of it's going to be crap. And with Richard and I like instantly agreeing on things like that, we were like, yeah, okay, so we know we're not the only ones that are feeling this way, and we want to talk about that, and we want to talk about why.
That's so rad.
Yeah, thank you.
That's so rad.
We want the good stuff and not the dumb stuff, and the sort of cross-dressing horror is the dumb stuff that's sort of, that's so 1980s in it's the worst way.
Oh my God.
It's the worst stuff.
Yeah, it's just some unrealistic bullshit these days, because we know that, you know, these are our friends you're talking about, you know, like these are our family, you know, like don't tell me the slasher's gay because that's my bestie, you know, like that just doesn't work anymore. So
it's like a character can have these other attributes to themselves, but when that becomes the driver for the narrative, I just kind of want to
Exactly.
tell you to just go away and try harder because you just failed. You failed at
Right?
everything you've done. Like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That's not scary. And if you are scared of that,
exactly.
maybe it's time to sit down, have a glass of water, look in a mirror, and reflect on who you are as a person and what you value in life. Because I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out
It,
there.
right? If the reason your killer is evil is because they're gay, is like, yeah, that's a you thing. That's
Yeah.
a you thing.
Yeah.
There's so much more interesting narrative out there. Like, and
Exactly.
that's kind of like what made me really interested about hearing this idea that you both came up with about talking about this. I was like, oh man, sign me up. Yes.
Nice. Nice.
Yes. Yeah, I'm terrified of half of the movies that are probably going to be talked about or more, but that's fine. That's fine. At least we
Yeah,
can be scared together.
There you
exactly.
go.
That's
Well,
that's kind
another
Yeah.
of where
thing
I'm with
too,
it.
in our conversations too, leading up to the show, was that Richard and I were finding that we were disagreeing on shows, or we would
Hmm.
disagree on a film. You know, he would be like, "Oh my God, this is like the most amazing, it's mind blowing, it's my inspiration for this," and blah blah blah. And I'd be like, "Yeah, I don't like it," you
Yes.
know? And rather than us being like, "You're wrong," you know, we were just more like, "Why?" Like,
Yeah.
I don't like this thing, but I want to know why you do, because that's really interesting. So
Hmm.
we wanted to have that also in a show where people disagreed about the art that was being discussed, but it wasn't a hostile disagreement.
Right.
It's a creative disagreement where it's like, okay, expand my mind. Tell me why you like it so much, you know,
Hmm.
or tell me why you hate this film that I love, because I'm really curious that maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's a perspective that I'm not seeing.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
these discussions
Exactly.
have like opened up so many films for me in ways, and also horror TV shows and horror books that we've talked about too, where I've just been like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And that's great. It's like it's a discussion as a gift, because it's like I can re-experience this art in a new way.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what art should be. It should be discussion. It should be a shared experience, whether you agree or understand the thing the same way. I mean, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Absolutely.
disagreement isn't necessarily disagreement. It's just seeing the same thing from a slightly different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mhm.
when you can understand each other's perspective, it's not, you realize it's not a disagreement. It's just coming at a thing from a slightly different angle. And when you can learn the other angle, I think it makes everything more interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, like any horror nerd, like I want more. I want new stuff. I want
Yep.
discovery, you know? And that's the hardest thing to find on the internet these days, is any kind of discovery, right? Because everything we're
Mhm.
dealing with online, like all the ways that we used to discover music and the ways we used to discover film and TV and stuff like that, is just like it's recursive and it's really difficult. It's really hard to
Hmm.
find new stuff. And so like anything that helps me do discovery is amazing. And that's another
Yeah.
thing we really wanted to do with this show, is make sure that we're introducing people to new stuff, or maybe showing them a different perspective on something.
Hmm.
And at the end of each show, we also close with things we're looking forward to.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
films that are coming out, books that are coming out. So we're doing a lot of the like discovery to help people find new stuff as well.
Hmm.
So, because that's what I want in a show. It's very
But we'll
Right?
talk
selfish.
about old stuff too. That's important.
Yes.
To give context to certain themes. And we want to have, we're going to not just talk about films, we're going to talk about film themes at different
Mm-hmm.
episodes, like folk horror, books to horror, films that terrified us as kids, films that
Mm-hmm.
terrified us as adults.
Mhm.
Um, Horror, one I'm looking forward to that we're going to do is horror that should have won an Oscar, because there's
Oh,
Yes.
that's
some
rad.
horror out there.
Yes.
And even in not the best movies, individual performances
Mm-hmm.
that were amazing. I think that'll be a real fun one for people. It'll be fun for me, at
Absolutely.
least.
I'm
Oh,
excited for
totally.
that one. Are you kidding me? I wanna kind of discover that. I mean, like, I'm gonna try and give my own slice of a little bit of tiny little slivers of levity here and there, and hopefully provide my perspective on like if things are really actually genuinely terrifying, and where my limits are. And I think that's fun for people to kind of calibrate against the
Hmm.
non-horror like enveloped, as she says that as I'm wearing a satanic floppy disk shirt. Like,
Yes.
I know I don't
Well,
look the part. I guess I could dress more square. I maybe that will help.
no, it won't help. No, but I mentioned this in one of the episodes, that one of our themes is actually horror films to watch with people who don't like horror,
Yes.
because I like the idea of us doing themes that are applicable to a bunch of different situations, and people where people approach horror from different perspectives. So that's a fun one, and that's a lot of like, these are the films I would pick to watch with Scotland kind of
Hmm.
stuff, where it's like, okay, these are maybe not necessarily always gentle horror films, but they're fun and they're
Hmm.
weird, and they're not traumatic. They're the you know
And even if they go a little hard at times, there'll be something thematically
hmm
that's
yeah,
extra about them. So it's not just monsters; it's monsters plus interesting perspectives coming from a different direction. Um, I can think of a couple of films that I won't mention right now, but I think that are scary, but I think Scotland might enjoy,
Oh,
and
I
we will
love this.
introduce her to them.
I love
excellent.
this.
It's funny that we're like, not going to mention those right now, because when we
Right?
do the show, we're very like, okay, look, we're doing spoilers. Like,
Yes.
let's just get that out of the way. Like,
Hmm.
each show is going to be, we're talking about these films. We're not withholding anything for the end. So when you watch our show, we're talking about the whole film. So if there's like a film that you're interested in that you haven't seen yet, that you don't want spoilers for, you're going to need to click to the next section for
Right.
sure.
Don't watch it. Go watch the film first. Get
Well,
scared out
watch
of
the
your
film
Exactly.
pants,
first.
and
Yeah,
then come
that's an
back.
option.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's great?
Or you know, at times I want to lead you up to the end of the movie, but not give it to you to get you to watch the movie. So we'll have spoilers, but we're going to leave you dangling a little bit. We're going to leave you dangling. It's a tease. It'll be a tease at times. A horror tease.
Little horror tease. I mean, I
Yes.
can
Yeah.
I can see the t-shirts for that now.
Yeah.
So it's raised by horror tease.
Yes.
Aw.
It'd be kind of cute. I'm into it.
Yeah.
I'm really, really into it.
All
So,
right. We
so
have
when
merchandising already.
I know it's coming, it's coming. Just give
Yeah.
it time.
Oh my God.
So, like, when you two sat down and you're like, all right, we love this stuff, we're into it, and you're putting, kind of the pieces together to get to this podcast and this idea. Like, do you want to share a little bit about the narrative that you two had at that time? Or like it was kind of like, well, the name came so easily. Did the whole concept come so easily?
Well, we had the concept
So,
before the name,
yeah.
and I think it did come pretty easily, because it was more like, hey, we're having these discussions, and these would be really fun to have with an audience and
Hmm.
with a wider community. And it just kind of came really naturally at
Yeah.
that point, because it was kind of something we were already doing, and we were already just geeking the fuck out on themes, like,
Hmm.
oh, wouldn't it be cool to talk about horror books that were made into films, and like what worked and what didn't, and what our favorites are, and what's fun and what sucks, and what inspired us from these. And I mean,
Hmm.
our list of upcoming show themes is so long, it's just
Yes.
ridiculous, because we have so many things we want to talk about. But
Hmm.
I mean, it was I think fairly easy,
Yeah.
because it felt like something we were already doing, and just wanted to open it up and grow it, basically. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It totally does. It
Okay.
totally does.
And with
Like,
Scotland here, I think it really opens things up more in terms of we talk to each other about horror all the time. We know all the sort of shorthand, but Scotland doesn't, and Scotland doesn't necessarily want to.
No,
at times.
not all the time.
Not all the time.
But she's good with boundaries.
Uh-huh.
And we're really good at respecting boundaries, which is also something
we can do the timeout
about. Yeah, exactly. The X. But that's also another thing too, is that another aspect of this show that Richard and I talked about that we hadn't seen in other shows is that we respect boundaries.
Yes.
Right? Like we respect each other's horror boundaries. So if I'm like, yeah, there's this one French extreme and I don't want to watch it because I just don't need to go there. It's going to be too traumatic. Like no one's going to push me. No one's going to be like, oh, but you just haven't, or actually, or anything like that. It's more like, yo, that's a boundary. There's a reason that's there. We respect it. So, and that's something that I think should be in more shows like this, where people talk about films that could be triggering and talk about films that are about traumas and films that do, push our relationship to our mental health and challenge us. Like that's where the boundaries are even more important. So.
And we have some personal boundaries for the show that we should probably say up front.
We do.
One of the big ones is animal cruelty. Films with animal cruelty, you can just say goodbye to. We're just not going to deal with it.
Yeah. If your lazy ass trope in your film is the serial killer kills a kitten and that shows the audience why he's bad, I'm like, you're a lazy writer. Go back to school. Go back to the drawing board, because that's a lazy ass horror shorthand, of the murdering the, animals or whatever. Like tell me that story in a better way. Tell me in a different way, but also no animal harm. Come on. Like
it's not necessary.
No.
It's not necessary. Like what context does it set? Like it sets that you're horrible and then you're okay with these themes. Like there are responsible ways to do it. And I have seen certain films and books that deal with it in a responsible way.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But it's not
if it's
often.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's gotta be actual storytelling. It's gotta be like, okay, this is a like, I forgot I was outside of the story kind of storytelling, something that pulls you in so much. It's got to be good. But for the most part, no. I mean, all three of us too, we're big cat lovers. So no cats get harmed in anything that we do.
No, please.
Not interested.
No.
Not interested.
No.
Or anything, puppies, goldfish, gorillas.
Personally, I'll also throw in there, like, I don't like it when people just hurt our animals that are, people often see as like, oh, it's a bat or it's a snake. Like, I like bats and snakes. I think they're great, but don't hurt them. Like, no, I'm not. I think it's a great boundary, and I'm glad it exists. Like, are there any other areas that like are no-go zones? Like, I know we each have our own personal boundaries, and we generally will talk about those in situ, because I think it's good to kind of just reiterate those. If it's like, ooh, this area touches on something that's a bit personally touchy for me, I'm going to just time out on that. Like, I don't know if there's any that we want to call out now, and that's okay if we don't have any. I think it's just it's good to know for the audience at home that we will call this stuff out, and we will do as much of it as we can, because a lot of these films are interesting, to say the least, in terms of their topics.
No, we endeavor to do content warnings. We're definitely the content warning crew, so no one is taken by surprise by anything that might hurt their psyche, that might be harmful to them. And, so for me, it's like, I know I'll never be interested in or reviewing any films about that, where the main theme is the parent is an abusive drug addict. And I nope out at that. That's a nope. That's not going to be a film that I'm interested in talking about. So, and I think one of the discussions Richard and I had too prior to starting the podcast was the context of sexual assault in horror.
Yes, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Because it's a big one. And it's also similar to the, bad guy kills animals trope. It's something that's trotted out as an excuse for writing an actual storyline, or an excuse for actually writing a full character, in my opinion. Like it's lazy, but it's also generally it's a sexist insert that's in a lot of horror films, where it's like, oh, and now this is where she has to get assaulted, or she's a serial, she kills because she got assaulted.
That's the big one. That's the real big one right there.
It's the biggest pile of trash, because Patrick Bateman in Psycho wasn't sexually abused or sexually assaulted. He's just a serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So a lot less there. That's a thing that we don't have a lot of tolerance for.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sexual assault in horror, because it's just, from a storytelling perspective, it's seldom necessary.
Exactly.
If ever. And also it's just gross to keep perpetuating it as a normal thing that should be part of the female experience in horror, or any gender experience in horror, period. Like that. Let's stop normalizing that shit in horror already.
Yeah.
Better stuff. There's way better stuff, way more better interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of imagination out there. We don't need to fall back on these old dumb tropes, and that's what they are. They're dumb.
Yep. They're dumb, and they perpetuate harms.
Yeah.
So out in the corner with the trash.
Knowing that stuff, and knowing we have those kind of like set boundaries, we know a little bit more about us, and we know a little bit more about kind of the show, and kind of like what can we entice everyone with, what might be coming. And Richard, I know you mentioned a moment ago kind of some of those areas, some of those themes about films that scared you as children and ones that scare you as adults, but what other things might be that we can tantalize people with?
Well, one is we are going to do a holiday horror show, and
I'm excited.
And I'm excited for that one too. I think we have a lot of good, amusing stuff, amusing horror, and a lot of really creepy horror around the holidays. So I think that'll be a really interesting show for people.
Yeah, because the holidays are creepy. Just straight up.
Period.
Historically and currently. Like, they're just creepy. It's also feel good horror too sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm thinking of one of the ones that I know that you and I watched last year, and it's pretty happy.
Yeah.
We will be doing that one, and you will know what it is very soon. It's a very fun movie with horror, with violence, with craziness, with bad people. You can do all that stuff and still have a feel-good movie in the end, and that's that's the stuff we want to get into.
Yep.
I'm excited. And I know we even have guests and stuff planned in the future. So I know that'll be exciting for everyone as we kind of dip into the treasure trove of the wonderful, wonderful guests that might be coming this way. I cannot say anymore. I've been sworn to secrecy.
Yep.
Otherwise, that some sort of horror will be unleashed on me, and I'm just not willing to deal with it. I already deal with enough horror from the dog, so I'm good.
But yeah, we have some really fun, exciting things coming up. We're going to do some talking about found footage. We're going down the found footage nerdy rabbit hole. And just so much stuff. Folk horror, because close to my heart. I love folk horror. Yeah. We already mentioned films that should have won an Oscar as well.
And we want to do the opposite of folk horror too, the city as horror.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Yeah, because we love the concept of the place is alive.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
That's rad. I'm excited for this.
Yeah. And we're going to do female killers. I believe we have a queer episode planned as well.
Absolutely.
Queer horror. What else? God, we have a super long list.
Cosmic horror, anthology movies.
Yep.
Oh, and we want to do some regional ones. Kiwi horror, Australia.
Yeah.
Yep.
Australia is having a real renaissance in
Yes.
horror right now. So you want to bring in as many of those as we can. And even some older ones that you might not have heard of.
Yes, absolutely.
Exciting. Deeply,
Mhm.
deeply exciting. So for people to learn more about this show, of course, they're watching or listening to it now. We'll be broadcasting this on YouTube, and we'll also be simulcasting it through most of your standard places that you can find podcasts. That'll all be in the link description below, so be able to get it in the format that pleases you the most.
Mhm.
But we have some other locations, Violet. We have a blog, and do you want to talk about any of that?
We have raisedbyhorror.com, which is also, we have a Tumblr, where we're going to be doing basically show notes on each show. There's also some background on us and links to our stuff. So, buy our stuff.
Please.
This show is a labor of love.
Yeah.
We are not getting paid to do this, at least at this point. But this is just something we're doing because we love it. And we have a donations page if you want to contribute to, equipment, gear, the time that we're spending doing all of this stuff, taking time out of our schedules. So all of that stuff can be found on the Tumblr. We have a Ko-fi, is that how you pronounce it? Ko-fi?
I think it's Ko-fi.
I don't know.
That's what I say. I think I say Ko-fi.
Okay, we have one of those, and that's a fund that's directly for the show. And yeah, we're going to be doing show notes. We're going to be doing show lists and just intermittent blog posts about fun stuff to discover in the meantime about horror, and also things that we might have wanted to talk about that we forgot. So if we do an episode of here are the 4 films that scared the shit out of me as a kid, and then I'm like, oh, but I forgot to mention these 3 films. We're going to put that in the blog post about the show. It'll be in the show notes. So
yeah, we're always going to have more films in the notes than we did on the show. I think pretty much always, because
we're pack
we
rats.
have big lists. We have big lists.
Yep. It's like hoarders, right?
Yes.
But like horror films in our brains.
It's probably going to horrify me to learn the amount of horror films that actually exist that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah, don't look at our themes list. It's just insanely long.
Yeah.
It's
embarrassingly long, realizing have I really watched that much horror in my life? Yes, I have. And we keep finding more.
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah, I absolutely can't wait. And that thinking of that list brings up a weird visceral image too from my childhood of there was a video store back when I know everybody. Video stores were a thing, and they were rad, and also dumb. But there was one that was themed. The whole video store was themed. It was massive. It was you go to the space section, it was space themed, or the romance section was romance themed, and they had a horror section that had a haunted house, the floor that would move and stuff like that, and weird,
that's brilliant,
monster that would come out and get you. And I just hearing the huge list just reminds me of I've probably seen many of these titles and blocked it out. So this is great. This is great. We're just going right back into handling trauma with friends.
Yes,
I can't even speak.
That's what a lot of horror is, though, too. It's like how we process trauma. So and what better way than to do it with a friend?
I'm excited. I'm really excited. Well, we're looking forward to taking everyone on this journey with us, and to take you through all of these films and all of these different thematics. We're looking at releasing our next episode on films that scared us as kids. So stay on the lookout for that. And I want to pass it over to Richard and Violet. Any kind of parting words? And this is really just an intro for everybody, but we hope you come along on this adventure.
Please join us. This is going to be weird and fun and silly and bizarre and just a road of discovery and discussions about horror films that you won't see anywhere else at all.
Mm-hmm. What she said, plus we will try to make everything as fun and informative along the way as we can, because we really want to dig into what these films are besides just, oh, look, that was the monster. We want to find out what went on behind the scenes when we can. And that's been fun part of our research for each show.
It's so cool. I'm really excited. And I know that we are looking forward to everyone joining us, and we cannot wait for you to subscribe and add this to your favorites and bookmark the site. I don't know how people do the internet anymore. I've given up. So here we are. We look forward to it. And thank you so much for stopping by. And please check out our links. Bye, everybody.
See you later.
How do I stop the recording?